on being in wars. He said himself, he was asked on Reddit, someone asked, what wars would you fight in? He said, quote, the Indian Wars, the Philippines, Haiti and Nicaragua in the 1920s, Vietnam, Nicaragua and El Salvador again in the 1980s. Small wars are pretty enjoyable. It's the big ones with the days of artillery fire and inhuman brutality that take the fun out of fighting.
Kia ora, and welcome to the listeners of 1 of 200. Today we have a special episode. My name is Josephine, and I'll be one of your co-hosts today. The other co-host is Kieran, and we're going to be discussing about electoral politics within, Western liberal democratic systems. In particular, we want to discuss a topic that's been hotly debated among podcasters and left analysts in the United States. It is the candidacy of Maine gubernatorial candidate Graham Platner, who recently stepped down after, a bunch of controversies. But this really has, become an issue of debate. And what our co-host Kieran is saying is that it is a symptom of a larger issue. So to discuss this, like I said before, I have Kieran here. Kieran, welcome. How are you today?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not bad. It's a beautiful, sunny Saturday, but, we are living in horrific times, both locally and globally. So I guess a key issue to discuss in this election year would be the systems that are before us, whether they are, reformable, or is it something that needs to be overthrown? What are some of the key issues underlying left politics as well within, the Western democratic systems here in Aotearoa, but also in the United States, using that as an example and this candidacy as an example. So a lot of the listeners might not be following the US debates and elections closely. I imagine a lot of our listeners would, but in case we do have people who are not up to speed on this, can you give an introduction about Graham Platner and why there is a controversy around his candidacy and, the circumstances that led to his resignation?
Right. Well, Graham Platner has actually been controversial from the beginning with certain people. A lot of people rejected him straight away, and that's largely because he has features that should be disqualifying for anyone who considers themselves on the left. Yet he persisted, and in fact people were defending him to the hilt right up to the last moment. And I think this demonstrates something about the psychology of politics in our electoral system, because something about the way we view people as representatives for us in this system makes us take them on as a leader and project our ego on them, or I see it in a lot of people anyway, and consequently people start making excuses for them when they probably shouldn't. So I thought this was a good illustration of the sort of tendencies that you could apply to other candidates that are not really up to the standard that they should be. So Platner...
go on.
No, Platner, he was... at 18 in 2003, he enlisted in the US Army. Now, 2003 is, of course, well into the global war on terror. We had already seen torture in the US. We'd seen a lot of anti-Arab state repression. We knew that there were extraordinary renditions going on and so forth. Platner, as an 18-year-old, said he didn't believe in the Iraq war, but he joined the military anyway and deployed to Iraq 2 years later and did 3 tours in Iraq from 2005 to 2007. And this is an extremely violent time in the occupation of Iraq. And he served in Fallujah, among other places. So, we're talking about a very, he's a Marine as well. So he's basically a frontline part of the US imperial killing system. And then after those 3 tours, he went back, did a little bit of study, and then deployed again. He joined the National Guard and went to Afghanistan for a tour. And then he also went back to Afghanistan in 2018 as a mercenary, working for a corporation called Constellus. So he is pretty much all in on being in wars. He said himself, he was asked on Reddit, someone asked, what wars would you fight in? He said, quote, the Indian Wars, the Philippines, Haiti and Nicaragua in the 1920s, Vietnam, Nicaragua and El Salvador again in the 1980s. As for would have, I did for Iraq, and I would love to get to the Gun. This is before he went to Afghanistan, so he's calling it the Gun. Small wars are pretty enjoyable. It's the big ones with the days of artillery fire and inhuman brutality that take the fun out of fighting. So he is a war lover, which is true of a lot of people who, like about 5% of people in combat actually really get a thrill out of it. Most people find it horrifying, but not him. He's a war lover, and these people tend to skew right, basically the war lovers out of out of World War I became the core of Nazism and so forth. So they formed the Freikorps.
And he did have a Nazi kind of tattoo on his chest. But yeah, that's a little bit about his past. But who he is and why he matters is that he was a political nobody until about a year ago, when some operatives, political consultants who are members of the DSA discovered him to be a challenger to Susan Collins, who is a long-time establishment person. They wanted to unseat Susan Collins from the gubernatorial race in Maine, and they discovered this talent. And they recruited him to be kind of like an insurgent within the Democrat Party. So Susan Collins is the current governor who is from the Republican Party. And what they were trying to do...
Zionist and a big supporter of ICE as well, currently under fire a lot because of the recent killing in Maine of a 26-year-old. So she is... you can see why people wanted someone to take her down. I think that's part of the picture as well.
Yeah, and they did. So Maine was a very important state for Democrats to win in order moving forward in their political future. So they actually fielded, the establishment fielded another establishment person. However, this insurgent, Graham Platner, who had the support of DSA operatives and political consultants who are looking for kind of like a Justice Democrats kind of shift in the Democratic Party, they fielded Graham Platner. They supported his campaign. They ran it professionally, and he won the Democratic primary to take down Susan Collins. And so it was going on like that until just a few weeks ago, when things became really controversial. The controversies went to a frenzy with the kind of expose about his sexual violence in the past, and leading to his resignation. So now they are, trying to find someone to replace Graham Platner to challenge Susan Collins from a Democratic Party in Maine. So that is really why he is significant. Looking at, why he came into the news, it's because he was a Democratic insurgent who won the primaries and who was going to take on Susan Collins in the coming election.
Right. Those are specificities. I think that one of the things about Platner was that his actual political platform, which of course is crafted by a bunch of people, is quite good. But this is actually what I was trying to get at was a question of who the actual person is and why people are making excuses for him, because he was anointed and groomed by a bunch of elitist bourgeois people, political insiders who basically he passed himself off as working class when he is anything but. But I think he seemed working class to them because they don't know what working class is. He was privately educated in his secondary school years. So they're basically sort of mistaking his maybe more unfortunate psychological tendencies, his love of violence, and as being authentically working class. So basically, it's their idea that if you're vulgar and repugnant, that makes you more working class. But this is a guy who, you talked about the Totenkopf, and of course he's denied knowing its significance. But of course, in the US military, there is quite an obsession with the SS. It's part of their culture. Now, that a lot of them will say that they are interested in the efficacy of the SS as a fighting force rather than their politics. But, it is difficult to separate the two when you start taking on their symbols and stuff like that. And they do, it's not uncommon for them to have the SS insignia and things like the Totenkopf. And I find it hard to believe that he did not understand the significance of that tattoo. Anyway, but I think even you can look past that and you can just get a glimpse of what sort of person he is, because he says things like about a wounded veteran. He looked at video of when this guy sustained his wound, and this is what he wrote about it. He wrote, "Dumb motherfucker didn't deserve to live. At least his stupidity and fat-ass wheezing are available for all future infantrymen to witness and hold in contempt. Poor marksmanship on the Taliban's part is the only reason this mouth breather made it home. He managed to make every possible shit decision possible when it comes to small unit combat." Now, this is basically demonstrating, and we can link this directly to his treatment of women. This is demonstrating an extreme lack of empathy. Now, if you are running in left-wing politics, and you're running someone who has the psychology of a fascist, which is what it is, then you've got to ask yourself what the hell is going on. And it doesn't matter what words come out of his mouth and what he says his policies are. The fact is, these are revealing things. And of course, those are the things that stick out. But of course, to us, other things stick out, like is the fact that he says some wars are dumb, but other wars are good, which is Trump's position on wars. He just didn't believe in stupid wars. So he criticizes wars on that basis, the same one as Trump. And, and of course, he does the whole quasi-religious militarism, the valorization of the vets as heroes that is part of the US culture. So I think as anti-imperialists, of course, we see that straight away and go, well, that guy's no good. But these people, some of them supposedly very left-wing, with him through thick and thin, and it was finally a really undeniably serious rape accusation that brought him down.
Yeah, so you were saying that he was, picked by the establishment, but, most of the narratives and what I've read are saying that, he was picked by DSA members of, for political consultants linked to the union movement and so forth. So, and
right.
a lot of the people on the, so a lot of people commenting on this, for example, this has caused a lot of discussion and debate, especially within the left podcast spaces, like ranging from streamer Hassan Piker to political nerds like Ryan Grimm and Brianna Joy Gray, all weighing in on this. And so a lot of people, out of the names I mentioned, except Brianna Joy Gray, they have been saying that what Platner is going through is an attack by the establishment against a someone who's anti-establishment. So if I just want to also talk about, where I'm coming from in this issue. Within my circles, my anti-imperialist circles, there has been discussions about Graham Platner, basically exactly what you said, right? His repeated interest in going back to US wars, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan, that really was already disqualifying, because some of the places he went to, like you mentioned, are places where United States committed well-recorded acts of horror, right, on the people in Iraq. We know that 1 million people died in that war, and he enlisted in the Marine Corps after graduation from high school in 2003. He was in the military he was deployed to Iraq in 2005 after enlisting in 2003. And so these are the aspects until that are disqualifying for people who have an anti-imperialist perspective, because it's not just a one-off, like he enlisted and he went and he came back and he stopped, but he's going back until 2018. In 2018, Platner returned to Kabul, Afghanistan for about 6 months as a State Department security contractor. So he was actually in the private militias, which, were getting contracts from the US defense budget. So he was actually part of one of the employees within the military industrial complex at that stage, providing diplomatic security to the US ambassador to Afghanistan. So there's just a pattern we can see here, right? Going back to Iraq, going back to Afghanistan again and again, to places where there were a lot of abuses on the local population. So that itself should be disqualifying because of the genocidal nature of some of these wars, right? But then we are seeing that the recent controversies are being raked up after some, information about a rape allegation from a former partner, I think, surfaces. And, for a lot of anti-imperialist commentators, it's like, he was already disqualified in our minds, given his history. But it took this. And so, like you said, when we were discussing this before we started the recording, famously someone said, try finding a perfect candidate.
Yeah. So on the majority report, I think people have said words to the effect anyway, but the producer who works for Jacobin as well said, good luck finding the perfect candidate. And that was, I think, as that the latest story of the rape had just broken. So but one of the things, like you said, the not establishment, but honestly, if you've got a law degree or a communications degree and you go to work for a union, that doesn't mean you're not part of the establishment. And of course, these are often Ivy League people as well. And the people actually picked him, they thought he was a working class guy, and they he is not a working class guy. He went to private school, and so forth.
But he fits the aesthetic of what Ivy Leaguers consider a working class guy is.
Yeah, they consider his macho-ness, his misogyny and stuff like that to be evidence of being working class, which is, of course, a massively classist, elitist, bullshit fucking thing to say, and the other thing is he deployed 3 times to Iraq between 2005, 2007, including Fallujah, and this was an extremely violent time. And yes, he does. He's on 100% disability for PTSD, which is interesting if he's 100% disabled and running for running to be a senator. But anyway, he does say he has PTSD from that time. Honestly, it's actually not unusual for PTSD to take up to decades to actually hit. People who were in Vietnam, they might be living their lives very dysfunctionally, admittedly, and then suddenly hit a crisis 30 years later. So PTSD can work that way, but of course, there's something again that, you can't really go past the basic underlying character flaws, and they all tie together, not character flaws, just who he is, really. These aren't things that are separable from his politics. But again, the phenomenon to me that is important is why people kept digging in their heels over him, and what it was. You had people like Ken Klippenstein saying that we're supposed to just have smooth groins. So you got these elite people putting up a fellow elite person, or an upper, basically in the upper level of the middle class person, and saying he's working class because they're so out of touch. And then they're basically saying that being a macho person makes you really working class, and then using this misogynistic language to say, well, we're sick of smooth groins. It's horrible. The whole thing's horrible. But again,
see, one of the reasons why I wasn't invested in this debate so deeply was because I've just grown really disillusioned by these supposed insurgent Justice Democrat candidates. For example, we saw AOC, we saw multiple examples of these, hand-picked consultancy, hand-picked candidates kind of getting into power and just selling out, or just not creating any change. So it wasn't really, it no longer interested me. But then, I was hearing about these things from the circles that I'm inside. So what does this really show about the system?
Well, AOC is another great case in point. It's someone who pretended to be working class when she wasn't.
That's right.
And it was, interestingly, Brianna Joy Gray, who never had time for Platner, she was very good on this, but when she was discussing it, she said, and Andy pretended to be working class. I don't even know if that's a bad thing or not, or whatever. And it's quite interesting, that perspective, that it's not seen as a big thing. But in fact, what it means is that you are fundamentally dishonest, and also, I think, people are concealing how little working class participation in politics there is. And we've become ever more authoritarian in our beliefs about who is suitable for political power. So, of course, on the right, it's very simple. They talk about CEOs and so forth, but we have our own. The left has an elitist thing as well, and these Ivy League sort of people are the perfect exemplar of it. We don't we don't consider how much their privilege may actually alter their ability to represent people who they are completely out of touch with. Whatever they say.
And like some of the PR and marketing teams that worked with Platner had previously worked with Zohran's campaign, Zohran Mamdani's campaign. So what what I see is happening is that there is this kind of liberal left in the U.S. who consider themselves the real kind of force that can change the United States by just having these different kind of candidates. Obviously, Graham Platner was a really, really terrible choice right from the start, but there are other examples, right? Like AOC, who herself was, from quite a privileged background, and she was part of these volunteering programs aligned with the U.S. State Department in Africa, and all of those things before, which didn't come to light, but she was marketed as a bartender, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but ultimately what these various, like whether it's the Squad or Justice Democrats, they really haven't used their power. They did have some power, for example, to stop the vote and to demand certain things from, the legislative system. And they didn't really do that when they did have power. They just kind of went with the establishment. So I'm really disillusioned by this reformist take on the US system, because there's fundamental rot in the system. The system is designed to support the elite and the privileged, and it's by, for, and of them, right? Like if you look at the Senate, who is in the Senate? I was looking at recently a discussion which said that the average age in the Senate, I think a majority of them are above 75 years old, and like been politicians for most of their life and keep getting re-elected, and they are very good fundraisers from lobbyists. So that is the key consideration of the US system is can you fundraise for these establishment parties? And then you get a few of these other new people like AOC and that, but they're not really. AOC, during the election, the presidential election, she lied to voters saying, Kamala Harris is trying hard to achieve a ceasefire when she was doing nothing, right? And even now she's doing nothing. In fact, recently when Senator Lindsey Graham passed away, Kamala Harris wrote, very glowing tribute to him. So really, there's really no difference between these parties. And, then we have people like Brianna Joy Bray coming around and saying we should consider outsiders, third party people. And that could be a strategy to actually create change in the United States. And, I'm skeptical of even that. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, I think I don't have an opinion. Well, I do have an opinion. Do whatever you can to make things better. I don't believe that there's a rule book or a formula that will work. We are opposed by a dynamic, conscious class of rulers who want to stop us from making things better. And there's so any formula you come up with is they can read books too, but I do believe that we have to stop doing their work for them. Now, someone like AOC, she is clearly as fake as anything. I mean, what she did 3 months of waitressing while she was waiting to do her high-powered internship. This is ridiculous. Why are we even, why would anyone because she relies on people putting their time and effort and their voice behind her to make her powerful. And she is powerful. But, this probably doesn't apply to other members of the so-called Squad. Yet she became the leading voice of the Squad, thus controlling those other people, and twisting them into supporting politics that they probably don't support. Now, what we need to do is it's political hygiene. Stop giving your voice and power to the people who work against you. Start actually being a little bit more discerning and less tolerant of people who are actually assholes. So, obviously, one could relate that to politics in this country pretty easily. And, it is a little bit more difficult to look at someone like Chris Hipkins and say, well, he's AOC or whatever. He doesn't really come across quite as poorly, but I do think that, again, you have to look at what he's actually done in his what he's used his power for, and a lot of it seems to be basically trying to destroy left-wing politics, really, in effect. So I mean, kind of, and I think there, we have this epidemic of these people taking over the politics of political parties that attract left-wing support and turning them to right-wing ends. Arguably, this is, kind of almost baked into the concept of liberalism, is it's kind of sucking people in with a leftish sort of facades to right-wing politics, or indeed allowing people who are actually psychologically very right-wing to have a mask of being progressive. So but I mean, if you look at I feel like there's a degree of coordination. Call me a conspiracy theorist, but certain people are considered a safe pair of hands for political power. And if we look at, Starmer, his old flatmate from university times thinks that he's probably was always an agent for the state, an infiltrator who was going from one left-wing group to another and was a police spy, basically, who was then groomed for power. And now we have Andy Burnham taking over from him. Now, the UK Parliament, the Labour caucus there is 410 people they could have chosen from, but they had to get someone to stand down from an electorate so he could stand to run. And what does that tell you about their politics and about how narrow the qualifications are for who is allowed to hold power? We see similar signs here in this country with who is allowed to lead the Labour Party, who is allowed to be in charge of foreign policy, who is allowed to be in charge of the SIS and so forth. I get the feeling that you need to pass a certain test before they will give you access to certain aspects of state power and political power in this country. So I would say that those people are not on our side. That's what I think.
Well, yeah. So what is the lesson that we can learn from this episode?
Well, again, it does go back to Platner is the example you can look at, and you can say, you can see these people, and anyone can look this up. Ryan Grimm in particular, after Politico broke the story of this rape allegation, he was going through it with a fine-tooth comb, saying grotesque things about whether completely irrelevant to
Right.
the fact that this woman had a very good substantive claim that she was raped, and trying to sort of triangulate and say, maybe we could look at it this way and it's not so bad. And it's like, no, it is really bad. But you could have done that from the beginning, from his Reddit posts about militarism. It could have been done when he was first picked for this position.
But it's just like zooming out this whole controversy and the debates. It's like I'm just looking at the United States system and people like Susan Collins, who voted in favor of the Iraq war, right? The entire system, the United States government, a lot of it is just soaked in war crimes and blood of the global South. Mm-hmm. And, here we have this individual who has obviously horrific history of participating in some of that blood-soaked history, repeatedly going back to some of the places where horrific violence was happening and participating in it. But I think the whole system is so compromised, and how can we look at the United States political system? I see it like it's like a money laundering mechanism for the military industrial complex, where you get all this facade of primaries and elections and all that, but ultimately what it does is it legitimizes the huge defense budget, the permanent war economy, the transfer of wealth from the people to the hands of these war profiteers. That is what the United States really represents from my perspective, looking at it from an anti-imperialist perspective. So, I just think these debates, like, this is the system, the nature of the system, right? Every single president of the United States is a war criminal. Barack Obama in his last year dropped 26,000 bombs on 7 countries, and he still holds a Nobel Peace Prize. So this is the country that we're discussing about. I don't know I want to see, destruction of US imperialism and the war economy and all that. And like, even if you look at someone like Zohran Mamdani, who's probably, not have a past like the one, we're discussing with Graham Platner, when he was asked about Maduro and the Cuban government, he called them both dictatorships, right? So it's just, I'm not really feeling very hopeful, whether it's about the United States or even the New Zealand, the system. What can we do here? We've got players like, New Zealand First, who just kind of, actors who go between National and Labour. And I really don't know what is the solution, except, what do you think? Is there how can we as leftists think about these issues differently? So are you thinking that, it's okay to think about, insurgent candidates who can unseat establishment candidates, but they need to be better candidates than these ones like AOC or Graham Platner?
Look, I mean, I don't think we can. I'm not involved in party politics, and I'm not going to get involved in that. I actually think that one of the things about mass politics is that really what people won't tolerate collectively can't happen. So the trick for elite politics is to get people to put up with worse and worse things, and that's the way it works. So in the US, of course, they have a system where you are usually voting against someone, not for someone. That is, the bulk of their political sentiment is that they are voting because they hate the other side. And of course, that system is being exported everywhere. This is part of creating a false binary between two sides, which are both, in fact, in on the same thing. And of course, they agree. They have, just as here we have bipartisan agreement and a lack of transparency about foreign policy issues. This is how the system works. Some things, probably the most important things, are taken out of the realm of electoral democracy on purpose, and then they use a psychological manipulation in order to keep us like voting for someone by making us hate or fear the other person. And Susan Collins
absolutely.
is a great example of that. Graham Platner is only half of the story. So and then the thing is that people aren't just holding their nose and voting for Platner, though they were defending him. And that's the kind of thing where people should be starting to look at themselves and go, what is going on here? What am I being sucked into doing? What does it actually mean about me and my politics? That, and also I think we need to stop thinking that that the best people to make all our decisions are the ones who get the highest qualifications from, Yale. I mean, it was Yale people who picked Platner. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I do agree. Like one of the key issues that Western democracies face is that the people have no say in the foreign policy decisions that the countries make. Often, foreign policy is an issue that comes up in the campaign. Yet, once a new government is formed or something, there's very little. A lot of the decisions just happen behind closed doors, and obviously the lobbyists and the people with the money, the people with the resources, the top 10% or the top 1%, they have a disproportionate say in politics. So can there be a better politics through our party electoral systems?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can always improve things, and I think that's part of the step towards revolution is to keep demanding more and changing what you can. This rather than sort of putting things off and saying, no, we need the revolution, and then we will seize power and exercise power and fix things. I think that's this is the wrong way of looking at it. So again, go out and vote by all means, but don't that shouldn't start and end that. And if you are involved in party politics, ask for more, demand more, like push people more. Don't support people because they wear the same bloody color as you. That's the last thing you should do. You're really holding their feet to the fire. Hold everyone's goddamn feet to the fire all the time when you can. So, I think that's part of the answer. I did have something else to say, but I've forgotten it. Yes. Yeah. What do you think? Would be more of a clearly one of the answers is that we have proper participatory mass political movements.
Oh, absolutely, right? Like, so the whole voting system, the electoral democracy system, it's tries to minimize people's participation in politics by just giving, it's a vote once in 3 years or 4 years or whatever, and that's it, right? But really, politics happens every day. So it's people power that's important, and recognizing that the system is rigged against the people is a good recognition to have. And how can we actually be insurgents to recreate or reimagine a different system, right? The current parameters aren't working. I can just think of an example here. During COVID, I was part of this movement from the global south called the People's Vaccine Movement, which was saying that we need to waive the patent and intellectual property laws during COVID, so that countries in the global south, where the factories that produce medical, equipment and medicines can actually access some of those medicines and treatments. And what happened during that time, we had Jacinda Ardern as Prime Minister here, and she wrote an op-ed alongside the South African leader saying where you live shouldn't determine whether you live under the COVID pandemic. However, when push came to shove, when it came to voting at the World Trade Organization, New Zealand didn't vote in favor of, waiving the patent laws in favor of the people's vaccine, basically. New Zealand abstained. And when we looked into this, what we found was that there was some lobbying. So some corporations in New Zealand, like Fisher and Paykel Healthcare, they had some, patent interests, or they held some patents on the ventilator technologies, which, was becoming extremely necessary to fight COVID. Oxygen was one of the key things that people affected by COVID needed while being treated in hospital. And so they moved against New Zealand New Zealand's stated position to support this effort. So eventually New Zealand ended up abstaining. So this is really how the levers of power are working in, within capitalist systems. It is always, the owners of the resources, the means of production, the powerful that have a bigger say than the people. So this is a fundamental issue within capitalism, and whether we can actually change it through our existing frameworks, probably, there could be some steps in the right direction towards it. But ultimately, unless we understand that political power derives from material and economic power, and if we actually want a democracy, we actually need to move towards economic democracy, where people actually have a stake in the means of production, in the land, in the resources, in the economy. At the moment, the people don't have any stake in the economy, right? The bottom 50% in this country own 2% of the wealth. So we're basically outside of having any stake in the economy of this country, right? 50% of the population on 2% of the assets and wealth of this country. There is absolutely no stake. So whether we go and vote once every 3 years or not, unless we are talking about expanding democracy into the economic realm, I don't really think that people hold power, and people can demand that, right? And they have done so in the past, and really positive changes have happened in the West during those periods for the working class in the West, right? Although it didn't solve the problems of imperialism and unequal exchange from the global South. It did create a better living conditions for workers in the West.
Yeah, well, and I mean, there's even, there is a history of solidarity with people in the third world too, that, is well and truly buried by now. But that is one of the things about people who aren't elitists, is they do get the idea of solidarity. Your vaccine example is perfect. How are you going to get someone like Ardern, who has an instrumental idea of politics? She herself groomed. She worked with Tony Blair's, lot, and however benevolent she wants to be, she's always going to view politics as a game of manipulation, rather than we win, all of us, by standing in solidarity with each other. And that is, there's a lot of science backing up the fact that is actually true. So a lot of these people who we have given our power to, rather homeopathically, because elections are kind of like this tiny dose of politics that makes you immune to the rest of politics. We give power to these people, and we have put them up on a pedestal. But in fact, I would say that we're talking about quite a cacistocratic system, which is a system of rule by the worst. So our foreign policy is dominated by crackpot realism, which is a term coined by C. Wright Mills, which is the people who really have a paranoid view of security and stuff like that. So, they go. Of course, in those days, it was about the communist menace, but they find menaces under the bed all of the time. And these people have very, very poor judgment, usually because they have such elevated status that they don't really respect other people or see the need for knowledge. And Chris Luxon is the perfect example of the apotheosis of this sort of system, because he thinks that as CEO of the country, he knows better than everyone else. He automatically gains knowledge from status rather than actually having to do the work of reading and thinking and all that tedious crap. He just knows better because he is better. And we've got this sort of ideology is all throughout our our culture. It's the way a lot of people see billionaires and so forth. Well, I mean, I think that's wearing off a little bit at the moment, but traditionally, anyone who, like Elon Musk or Bill Gates or whatever, if they're successful, we think that that means that they have some sort of special abilities, and it's mystified. It's a superstition. They're given a kind of almost supernatural power to do things that they don't need to do the hard work of knowing what they're talking about. They just do it by instinct, you know. Yeah, and this is basically who we're allowing to lead us in this system. And you know, I mean, there are maybe some checks and balances from a professional bureaucracy, but again, they are also a world unto themselves. So and I think we just, again, like, you know, you look at Albania, they reached a point where it doesn't matter that their president goes, oh, we're such a small country and this is $4 billion, can't you see the sense in it? You know, he is actually embodying exactly the sort of attitude that you would get from Chris Hipkins or Jacinda Ardern as much as you would from Luxon. It is basically, it's like the meme with from The Simpsons with Seymour Skinner about, like, you know, could the kids be right? No, the kids are all wrong. These people don't get it a lot of the time. They are living in a bubble. You know, there's a bubble for elites. Nothing proves it more than their reaction to the Holocaust in Gaza, you know? And they still live in a society that keeps telling them that they're the best of the best. And one of the things I would say about electoral politics in this country is that even the best of the candidates, what they want you to do is to promote them, not to promote their policies, not to promote solidarity, not to promote ideas, not to promote a society. What they're doing, they're putting themselves forward and they want you to empower them to act on your behalf. And that is a sick system. You know, they should be wanting you to empower the politics they believe in, but this is the way it's structured. So I think that we can ask more. We can, you know, those of you who remember or saw the Wire will remember the character who the mayor of Baltimore, based on a real person who tried to become the Democratic candidate for president. But yeah, if you remember, his attitude was basically, I'll do whatever it takes to give myself power because I'm good and I will fix things. So he did all these terrible things in order to gain more power. And this is the problem with current politics. People are compromising, people are doing shitty things. Again, you know, looking at that vaccine example with Ardern, she's doing something that is morally wrong, but she thinks she's doing it for the greater good. You know, and so we need to demand more. We need to be like, you know, like the Albanians. They saw something, they can see immediately that it's wrong, and they react. And we, you know, unfortunately, we live in a very mediated world where a lot of politics is a lot of political communications and policy decisions are based on sophisticated information about basically kind of nickel and diming us, doing the worst they possibly can without making us get really angry and do something about it. And just constantly, it's a ratcheting down system for for democracy and for our material conditions as well. So, you know, I think, yeah, ask more. Everyone.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just want to, you know, conclude the pod by just thinking about, you know, the state of affairs that we are within and, you know, what can be done. Like, Che Guevara talked about, you know, many Vietnams, that we need multiple Vietnams, that, you know, anti-imperialist confrontations need to happen where we destroy or defeat the empire. And what Che was talking about was that actually the struggle against to overthrow the U.S. empire needs to come from the global South, the Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Pacific, and just observing these debates happening in the imperial core in the United States, and that it's just like I was of the view, learning about Che and learning about the world and history from a historical materialist perspective. I was thinking, okay, now the contradictions in the imperial core are getting really horrible, right? The conditions of the working class in the West is declining rapidly. The working class were able to be recruited into the imperial system, became subscribers of it or willing participants in it or supported it, I think, through the consensus that was achieved through in the social democratic period where the Western elite were trying to avoid a revolution, right? So they gave some concessions to the working class. And you're right, Kieran, at that time there was solidarity with the third world, but those elements were suppressed. More loud and more visible was the idea of Western exceptionalism. Like, look at the working conditions of workers in the West under capital, in the imperial core, in the capitalist core, they are way better than in the third world and so forth. So they were, I think the Western worker was recruited into that long-standing exceptionalist position through the social democratic shifts. And I just, looking at these debates like about Graham Platner and how the Western so-called left are, were backing him, I think that, perhaps Che was right. We can't wait for the imperial core to make a shift that is going to be in the benefit of themselves, but the entire world, because we are living through a genocidal age, and there is the imperial boomerang happening in the imperial core, but a stage of planetary destruction as well. And yeah, I think that again, the burden is on the global South, on Iran, on the Palestinian resistance, on Burkina Faso, on all these countries at the moment fighting imperialism. That's where my hope lies again. It's so sad. I was hoping that working class in the West would up their game, and this Graham Platner episode just shows that I can't really expect much from the because or from the left in the imperial core. Do you have any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that there are these outstanding examples of states that are in conflict with the US empire at the moment. But we have to recognise that throughout the global South, their politics is normally as controlled as ours. And I think that actually we're all interconnected, and there is there isn't I do have a lot more hope from the global South in some ways, but looking at you just need to look at Latin America and see this kind of the way they're always pushed back from the point where they are about to have a genuine turn against the US empire that actually sticks. There's always a power that can intervene. And for some reason they end up like with results like the recent elections in Chile and Peru and where else was it? Colombia? Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that we would be naive to think that there is some less controlled politics out there. But again, it relies on people tolerating what's being done. And if we in small ways demand more, that will lead to demanding more in bigger ways. It will create a culture of not making excuses for shitty politics, and that's a start.
Obviously there's the imperial system is global, and obviously what the imperial system requires is compradors in the global south, and we have been seeing that right since the last 400 years. That's what has been happening. Look at Fiji, right? Fiji is a perfect example of how the empire created a division within the people, where the workers over there, and constructed a client comprador class over there, and now Fiji has opened an embassy in Jerusalem, and inviting Israel and all that. Obviously that's happening, but there is an axis of resistance in the global south, and Iran is a good example. Palestinian resistance is a good example, and yeah, that's what I meant about my hopes are in the axis of resistance. But anyway, that was a special episode of 1 of 200 podcast. Do you have any last final remarks?
Yeah, I think we have people at the top, and I think that's the fact. We have a hierarchical structure. People have power at the top, and they have all sorts of advantages. I think one of the things that is important to recognise is that means that we cannot fall to abstract politics. So you were mentioning Fiji. This was created by the situation was created by transmigration of workers. And I remember there was a point at which the resistance to globalization came in the form of people demanding the freedom of the movement of labor to match the freedom of the movement of capital. And I understand why that seems good, but not everything is. You have to pay attention to the circumstances. If you have an abstract idea like that, then how is it actually going to play out? Because what the creation of Fiji came out of the freedom of the movement of labor, but not the empowerment of the people, not the empowerment of those people in their labor. In fact, it was a disempowering thing, because they're moving to somewhere where they are not indigenous, they have no connection, and they are thus radically dominated by the interests that took them there. So again, it's a salutary lesson in why the politics has to go to the root. It has to be radical, and it has to be based in things that are at the foundation level, not like a prescription from a different level. Because if you're not changing the power structure, then any prescription will be used by the ruling class for their own advantage. So that's what I'd have to say about that. And the same, it's just like Graham Platner's policy positions were fantastic. Again, not his, written by a bunch of people, what he stood for, but what he would have actually done as a senator would have been shit, and it happened before. There wasn't really. I don't think there was that much wrong with I've forgotten his Fetterman. There weren't that many reasons for disbelieving in him before he became a senator, and then look what he became immediately. And I would say I feel the same about AOC, quite frankly. So that's all. I just ask more from people, and and don't think that politics begins or ends with elections.
Thank you for listening. That was a special episode of 1 of 200 podcast.